Christa Pike is scheduled to be executed by the state of Tennessee on September 30th, 2026, for a murder she committed at the age of 18. She is the youngest woman sentenced to death in the United States in the modern death penalty era. If Tennessee carries out that sentence, she will be the first woman executed in the state in more than 200 years. None of that is the story. The story is what happened on a rainy January night in 1995, who it happened to, and how many people and institutions had every reason to see it coming and did nothing. If you follow cases where the system had the information and failed to use it, subscribe now. This one has that failure documented at every stage, from infancy through the night of the killing. Colleen Slemmer was 19 years old. She grew up in Orange Park, Florida, with her mother, May Martinez, her stepfather, and her younger sister. She ran marathons. She roller skated every weekend. Her mother called her a computer geek, and that was not an insult. Slemmer loved computers, loved working with children, had been volunteering with disabled kids since she was 8 years old. When her family could not afford to send her to college, she looked for another way. The Job Corps, a federally funded vocational training program, offered computer technology courses at its Knoxville, Tennessee center. The one closer to home, in Jacksonville, did not. So Slemmer enrolled in Knoxville. She had been there approximately 3 months when Christa Pike killed her. May Martinez has spent 30 years waiting for her daughter to come home in pieces. The state of Tennessee has, over the decades, mailed her portions of Slemmer's remains without explanation. Over the years, Tennessee has mailed me body parts in a box, not saying what it is or anything like that, Martinez said. And I just get body parts. The skull fragment that Pike removed from Slemmer's head and kept as a trophy has remained in state custody. Martinez has not buried her daughter. Slemmer's ashes sit in a pewter box in Martinez's Florida home. She is waiting. Patricia Jones was a fellow inmate at the Tennessee Prison for Women when, in August of 2001, Pike attacked her. Jones survived. The long-term physical and psychological consequences of the attack on her are not documented in the public record, and that absence is itself part of what this case leaves unresolved. Christa Pike was born on March 10, 1976, in Beckley, West Virginia, premature. Her parents married, divorced, reunited, and separated again across a 2-year cycle defined by infidelity, instability, and at least one suicide attempt by her mother. Her father was frequently absent. Her mother prioritized other things. Family members documented the conditions of the home when Pike was an infant. She crawled through piles of animal waste. An aunt reported it. The documentation exists. Nothing changed. Pike's paternal grandmother raised her. That was the stable thing in her life. When Pike was 12, her grandmother died. Pike moved back in with her mother. Her mother introduced her to marijuana. She was 12 years old. She had attempted an overdose of acetaminophen in the 3rd grade. She received psychiatric treatment after that. Then the treatment stopped. A teacher had reported concerns about sexual abuse when Pike was in kindergarten or 1st grade, observing her drawing sexual imagery, at an age where that is a documented warning sign. Her mother was advised to pursue counseling. Her mother did not follow through. Post-conviction attorneys and expert witnesses later established that Pike had been raped multiple times as a child, was dependent on alcohol and marijuana by 12, and had attempted suicide multiple times as a teenager. At trial, Dr. Eric Engum testified that Pike had an IQ of 111, suffered from severe borderline personality disorder, cannabis dependence, and depressive disorder. After conviction, post-conviction expert Dr. Jonathan Pincus examined Pike and diagnosed organic brain damage, bipolar disorder, and PTSD. Those 2 diagnoses are in direct conflict, and courts have never resolved which is medically accurate. The Sixth Circuit in 2019 acknowledged the discrepancy and found it did not constitute prejudice sufficient to overturn the sentence. That is a legal finding, not a medical one. In 10th grade, Pike was sent to a juvenile facility. That facility introduced her to the Job Corps. In late 1994, having completed her GED, 18-year-old Christa Pike arrived at the Knoxville Job Corps Center. No mental health assessment followed her there, no alert about her history, nothing. She began a relationship with Tataril Ship, 17. Together, they developed an interest in occult and satanic imagery. Fellow residents knew about it. Nobody flagged it. In the weeks before the murder, Pike's jealousy and fixation on Colleen Slemmer were visible to the people around her. She made threatening statements within the peer group. She was known as volatile. Pike had convinced herself, without any documented basis, that Slemmer was pursuing Shipp. Friends of Slemmer's denied this entirely. Job Corps staff did not intervene. There is no documented record of any warning reaching a supervisor, any conflict mediation, any reassignment of dormitory, any conversation with either Pike or Slemmer about what was building between them. The peers saw it. The institution did not. On January 11, 1995, the day before the murder, Pike told her friend Kim Iloilo that she planned to kill Slemmer. Iloilo was 18 years old. She thought it was empty talk. She dismissed it. The next morning, she watched Pike and Slemmer leave together. Iloilo was not a trained professional. She was a teenager. The moral weight of what followed cannot rest on her. The question belongs to every institution that encountered Pike before that moment and let her arrive at it without a single sustained, effective intervention. On the night of January 12, 1995, Pike, Shipp, and a third student named Shadala Peterson persuaded Slemmer to sign out of the dormitory with them. The stated pretext was smoking marijuana. The four walked from the Job Corps Center through Tyson Park, onto a paved pathway on the University of Tennessee agricultural campus, and into an isolated wooded area near the campus greenhouses. Pike brought tools, a box cutter, a small meat cleaver. These were not impulse items. The attack began once they were out of sight. Pike struck Slemmer with her fists, banged Slemmer's head against her own knee, kicked her repeatedly in the face and torso, and slammed her head onto the concrete ground. Shipp assisted. He restrained Slemmer and struck her with a rock. Peterson stood as a lookout. Pike and Shipp used the box cutter to slash Slemmer's stomach, back, and throat. 6 incisions on the throat alone. They used the meat cleaver on her back. They threw chunks of asphalt at her head, fracturing her skull in at least 4 places, embedding bone fragments into her brain. They carved a pentagram into Slemmer's chest. They attempted to carve another into her forehead. The attack lasted between 30 and 45 minutes. Pike delivered the fatal blow. She raised a large piece of asphalt and brought it down on Slemmer's skull. At some point mid-attack, Pike asked Slemmer a question. "Colleen, do you know who's doing this to you?" Slemmer did not speak. She only moaned. Pike's taped confession, given 2 days later, documents her own account of the moment she decided Slemmer could not be allowed to survive. She told York she decided she couldn't let Slemmer go because Pike would be cut from the program when the Job Corps found out about the assault on Slemmer. That is not a loss of control. That is a calculation. After Slemmer was dead, Pike removed a fragment of her skull. She carried it back in a napkin in her leather jacket. The following morning at breakfast, she told people about it. "And yes, I'm eating breakfast with it," she said. She showed the fragment to Iloilo. She described the killing. She bragged about what she had done. Slemmer's body lay near the agricultural campus greenhouses until the next morning, when 2 University of Tennessee physical plant employees found it. A groundskeeper testified that the body had been so severely beaten that he initially mistook it for the carcass of an animal. Pike's bragging the morning after the murder drew police attention almost immediately. The connection between Pike and Slemmer was not difficult to establish. She had not been quiet about it. Within approximately 36 hours of the body's discovery, Knoxville Police Department investigator Randy York had Pike, Shipp, and Peterson in custody. All 3 were at the Job Corps Center. Pike waived her Miranda rights. She gave a complete statement. It was taped on January 14, 1995, 2 days after the murder, and it became one of the central pieces of prosecution evidence at trial. She admitted to the core facts. She denied carving the pentagram. She denied keeping the skull fragment. Both denials were contradicted by witness testimony and physical evidence. Shipp told police the killing had been framed as a satanic sacrifice. Peterson pleaded guilty to accessory after the fact and received probation in exchange for testifying against Pike and Shipp. Her own account was that she was present but did not participate. No court has found otherwise. Pike's trial opened in March 1996. The prosecution was led by Deputy District Attorney General Steve Sword, who argued the crime was not a loss of control, but calculated brutality demonstrating depravity of mind. The evidence included Pike's taped confession, testimony from Shadola Peterson, testimony from Kim Iloilo documenting both the pre-murder statement of intent and the post-murder bragging, and forensic analysis confirming skull fractures at 4 locations with bone embedded in the brain. The defense called Dr. Engum, who testified that Pike suffered from severe borderline personality disorder and, in his opinion, had not acted with deliberation or premeditation. He characterized it as a loss of control consistent with her diagnosis. Pike's troubled childhood was raised during the penalty phase through family testimony. Trial counsel had originally planned to call a dedicated mitigation expert named Dr. McCoy. Shortly before the penalty phase hearing, the attorney switched course and called only family members instead. That decision became the central argument of nearly 3 decades of appeals. On March 22, 1996, after only a few hours of deliberation, Pike was found guilty on both counts. 8 days later, she was sentenced to death by electrocution and to a concurrent 25 years for the conspiracy charge. She was 20 years old. She became the youngest woman sentenced to death in the United States in the post-Furman era. Todariel Shipp was tried separately in January 1997 and found guilty on both counts. He was 17 at the time of the crime, making him ineligible for capital punishment under constitutional law. The judge sentenced him to life in prison with parole eligibility, plus a consecutive 25 years on the conspiracy charge, ensuring he would not become eligible for parole until his late 40s or early 50s. His first parole hearing came in October 2025. It was denied. His next review is scheduled for 2031. The sentencing disparity between Pike and Shipp has been litigated through every available court. Pike's attorneys have argued, including in clemency petitions, that Shipp was a leader in the offense and that Pike was in an abusive relationship with him that reduced her culpability. No court has made that finding. What courts have consistently noted is that Shipp's age, not his relative culpability, is what saved him from the death penalty. That distinction is not a small one. Pike's appellate journey runs across nearly 3 decades and every level of the federal judiciary. In 1999, she filed a pro-SC post-convictions petition alleging ineffective assistance of counsel. In 2001 and 2002, against legal advice, she asked courts to drop her appeals and requested immediate execution by electrocution. A trial court judge set an execution date for August 19, 2002. On July 8, 2002, Pike changed her mind. Zeist, defense lawyers moved to reinstate appeals. The trial court denied the motion. On August 2, 2002, a 3-judge state appeals panel ruled that proceedings should continue. The ineffective assistance argument centered on the penalty phase mitigation, and specifically on the switch from a professional mitigation expert to family testimony alone. Post-conviction expert Dr. Pincus's diagnoses of organic brain damage, bipolar disorder, and PTSD, which differed substantially from Dr. Engum's trial diagnosis, became the basis for arguing the jury heard an incomplete picture of Pike's mental health. As noted, the Sixth Circuit acknowledged the discrepancy in August 2019, but found no prejudice sufficient to vacate the sentence. In that same 2019 ruling, Judge Jane Stranch wrote a concurrence stating that society's evolving standards of decency likely do not permit the execution of individuals who were under 21 at the time of their offense. She was writing about Christa Pike specifically. She agreed the existing Supreme Court precedent did not support relief. The broader constitutional question, whether executing people who were 18 at the time of their crime violates the Eighth Amendment, remains unresolved at the Supreme Court level. Certiorari was denied in 2020. A 2022 Tennessee Supreme Court ruling on mandatory life sentences for juveniles prompted Pike's attorneys to attempt to reopen post-conviction proceedings in 2023. Knox County Criminal Court Judge Scott Green denied the request, noting that the ruling applied to juvenile offenders, and Pike had been legally an adult, 1 day older than the constitutional threshold. That is the number that has defined this case for 30 years. On September 30, 2025, the Tennessee Supreme Court set Pike's execution date for September 30, 2026. On January 8, 2026, Pike filed suit in Davidson County Chancery Court, challenging the lethal injection protocol on 2 grounds. First, that her Buddhist spiritual advisor has been excluded from the execution chamber in violation of her religious liberty rights. Second, that her medical conditions make the pentobarbital protocol particularly dangerous for her. She has a blood clotting condition called thrombocytopenia, small veins that make needle insertion difficult, and bipolar disorder and PTSD. Her lawyers have argued the protocol would cause fluid to build in her lungs, a death they described in legal filings as drowning. That lawsuit was pending as of the most recent reporting available. As of May 2026, no ruling on a temporary injunction in that case has been published. The execution is scheduled to proceed on September 30th, 2026. More than 2,500 people have signed a clemency petition asking Tennessee Governor Bill Lee to stop the execution. A dedicated advocacy website, mercyforchrista.org, is active. The advocacy centers on Pike's age at the time of the crime, the sentencing disparity with Shipp and Peterson, her documented childhood trauma, and her mental health diagnoses. Mae Martinez, Slemmer's mother, has said, "Justice has to serve. It cannot go on like this. I'm just hoping Tennessee does what they're supposed to do." She supports Pike's execution and wants Shipp to remain incarcerated. Randy York, the investigator who led the case in 1995, is retired. He has stayed in contact with Martinez for more than 30 years. "I never met the victim in life," he said recently, "but once you investigate a case, they become yours." For more than 30 years, Pike lived in conditions her attorney described as the size of a parking space, in de facto solitary confinement as the only woman on Tennessee's death row. In September 2024, she reached an agreement with the state that gave her equivalent access to programs available to the men on death row: a job, shared meals, more time out of her cell. She converted to Buddhism during her incarceration. She has a spiritual advisor. Colleen Slemmer's ashes sit in a pewter box in Mae Martinez's home in Florida. Her mother has not buried her. The skull fragment that Pike removed from her daughter's head the night she killed her remains in state custody. Whether it has been returned to Martinez, as of the date of this video, I cannot confirm with certainty. What Martinez has said is this: something you don't want to face, your daughter's skull in front of you every day, and have it passed around like it was a piece of meat. 30 years, still waiting. The child welfare system documented Christa Pike's conditions from infancy and never sustained an effective intervention. The Job Corps admitted her at 18 with no assessment and no alert. Kim Iloilo heard Pike say she was going to kill Slemmer and thought it was just talk. Colleen Slemmer went outside that night because she thought they were going to smoke marijuana. Here's the question I want to leave with you. Tataril Shipp was 17 years and 10 months old when Colleen Slemmer was killed. Christa Pike was 18 years and 10 months old. A 12-month age gap put one of them on death row and the other on a path to a parole board. Should the law draw a line that sharp with stakes that absolute? Drop your answer in the comments. Every response gets read. If this case made you think, subscribe and leave a comment below. The debate on this one is not simple, and I want to hear where you land.